Toto Wolff unleashes his fury at Lewis Hamilton during the post-Austrian Grand Prix press conference. Stick around until the end if you want to hear Hamilton's reaction. Throughout the entirety of his astonishing Formula One career, every chapter that Lewis Hamilton has written until now has been inked under the emblem of one brand, Mercedes. From the very early days when he transitioned from a promising young prodigy to a global sporting icon, the power, balance, and technical brilliance of Mercedes machinery served as both the foundation and the catalyst for his incredible rise to dominance. Every Grand Prix victory, every pole position, every last-lap heartbreak, and every world championship, 7 in total, were all deeply entwined with the technological masterpiece that Mercedes-AMG Petronas F1 team had constructed around him. His name became virtually inseparable from the Silver Arrow. It was not just about performance on track. It was about synergy, about instinctive understanding between man and machine, about thousands of hours of simulator work, telemetry studies, debriefs, and trust, built over years with engineers, mechanics, strategists, and a team principal who knew him like no one else. Hamilton and Mercedes weren't just a driver and a team. They were a philosophy, a force of nature that set new standards for excellence and consistency across the most demanding sport on Earth. Now, after nearly 2 decades in the sport and an entire era spent sculpting his legend under the Mercedes banner, Lewis Hamilton finds himself navigating entirely unfamiliar terrain. For the first time in his professional life, he is seated inside a cockpit adorned with a prancing horse of Scuderia Ferrari, surrounded by a sea of red rather than silver, working alongside engineers whose methods are unfamiliar, collaborating with a team that speaks a different language, both literally and metaphorically. The power unit beneath him hums with a cadence he has not yet mastered. The car responds in ways that still surprise him. The braking zones, throttle application, tire behavior, and aerodynamic feedback all require recalibration. Even the software tools, data interpretation practices, and intra-team dynamics differ from what he grew accustomed to over the past decade. Everything about this environment is new, from the steering wheel layout to the rhythm of the debriefs, and Lewis, despite his immense experience and talent, is starting from scratch in many respects. As he embarks on this new chapter with Ferrari, expectations are monumental. This is not merely a team change, it is a seismic shift within the world of motorsport. Hamilton's move to Ferrari is one of the most high-profile transfers in the history of the sport, not only because of his star power but because of what it symbolizes. Ferrari, the oldest and most iconic name in Formula One, joining forces with Hamilton, the most successful driver of all time in terms of wins and pole positions, represents a convergence of history, ambition, and unfulfilled potential. Yet, just a few races into this new partnership, the judgments have already begun. The media, ever hungry for headlines, have pounced on every mistake, every underwhelming result, every nuance in his tone during post-race interviews. Analysts dissect his body language. Social media speculates about his commitment. Critics have started to whisper the most blasphemous of words, decline. But in the midst of this rising wave of criticism came a voice, clear, calm, and commanding, one that instantly resonated across the paddock. It was Toto Wolff, the man who not only led Mercedes through its most dominant era but who also served as Hamilton's strategic partner, psychological anchor, and steadfast ally for over a decade. "It's not fair to judge him yet," Wolff said. Just 6 words. No elaboration. No dramatic delivery. But the weight of that statement was unmistakable. Those who understand the inner workings of Formula One immediately recognized that this was not merely a show of support. This was not just an old boss defending a former employee. It was something far more intricate, something rooted in strategy, in political awareness, and in deep emotional intelligence. Formula One is as much about what is said as it is about what is left unsaid, and Wolff's choice of words, his tone, his timing, and his silence on certain names all formed a sophisticated message, carefully constructed for maximum impact. On the surface, it appeared as a simple defense of a struggling driver. But beneath the surface, there was a multifaceted warning aimed directly at Ferrari's leadership, a subtle but unmistakable caution not to mishandle the delicate transition their newest driver is undergoing. Wolff never named anyone. He didn't mention Ferrari. He didn't call out team principal Frederic Vasseur, nor did he reference the inner workings of the Scuderia. And yet, his message couldn't have been clearer. It was a call for patience, a demand for perspective, a plea not to crush one of the sport's most mentally sensitive and complex athletes under the premature burden of expectation. Wolff understands that elite athletes, particularly someone like Hamilton, who thrives not only on speed but on emotional and psychological stability, need time to recalibrate in new environments. And he knows how easy it is to ruin even the most promising partnerships through miscommunication, internal pressure, and reactive decision-making. Having spent over a decade with Hamilton, Wolff understands his psychology better than most. He has witnessed how Hamilton responds to support, how he processes criticism, how he recalibrates after setbacks. He knows that greatness cannot be summoned on demand in an unfamiliar setting. It needs to be nurtured. Hamilton is not a machine. He is a deeply intuitive, fiercely emotional, and relentlessly analytical human being. He requires a team that believes in him, not just publicly, but internally, behind closed doors, in every debrief, in every message over the radio. And when that belief wavers, when the atmosphere becomes more about critique than collaboration, the results can be devastating, not just for Hamilton, but for the entire team. Wolff has been paying close attention. He hears the way Ferrari's leadership has remained publicly silent after Hamilton's early struggles. He notices the way the Italian media, which is notoriously unforgiving, has begun to question whether the marriage of Hamilton and Ferrari was a mistake. He sees the pressure mounting from within, a subtle erosion of trust that begins with small criticisms and gradually escalates into open doubts. He knows the pattern. He's seen it before, both at Mercedes and elsewhere in the sport. And he also knows that Hamilton, for all his composure and poise, is not immune to the psychological strain that such an environment can create. What made Wolff's statement so significant was that he had no reason to make it. Hamilton is no longer his driver. Mercedes and Ferrari are direct competitors. Wolff gains nothing by defending a rival driver. And yet, he chose to speak out. That act alone speaks volumes about the respect he holds for Hamilton, not just as a driver, but as a person, as a partner, as a symbol of an era they built together. It also reveals something more profound about the legacy they share. Despite no longer working together, there is a bond between them that transcends competition, transcends contracts, transcends the ever-shifting allegiances of the Formula One circus. It is a reminder that some partnerships leave an indelible mark. Hamilton's move to Ferrari is not just a professional challenge, it is a personal one. It's a test of his ability to adapt, to reinvent, to lead in a culture vastly different from the one he dominated for so long. It's about more than speed. It's about resilience. It's about whether he can carry the weight of expectations that come not only from fans but from decades of Ferrari history. And whether Ferrari can give him the space, the tools, the support system, and the belief necessary to bring that vision to life. Wolff's words may not have changed the trajectory of Hamilton's season, but they served a crucial purpose. They shifted the narrative. They reminded the world that greatness cannot be judged in weeks. They placed the responsibility back where it belongs, not solely on the driver's shoulders, but on the entire structure around him. Because Formula One is not about individuals. It is about systems. And even the greatest driver of all time needs the right system to succeed. The road ahead for Hamilton at Ferrari is uncertain. There will be more critics, more speculation, more pressure. But what remains unquestioned, at least to those who know this sport intimately, is that Lewis Hamilton is still capable of extraordinary things. Whether Ferrari can help him unlock that potential remains to be seen. But one thing is clear, the legacy he built at Mercedes is not just about wins and titles. It's about moments like this, when respect transcends rivalry, when silence would have been easier, but a voice chose to speak. And that voice, once again, was Toto Wolff's. Even though Lewis Hamilton now races in red, having crossed the threshold into Ferrari territory with all the headlines and grandeur that such a move brings, the emotional connection he built with Mercedes remains as unshakable as ever. It's not simply a question of where he drives now or which team's colors he wears. It's a matter of legacy, of deep-rooted identity, of the kind of loyalty that can't be undone by contracts, sponsorship deals, or seasonal shifts. For over a decade, Hamilton didn't just drive for Mercedes, he was Mercedes. The team wasn't merely a machine of engineers and strategists behind him. It was a living, breathing organism that rose and fell with his triumphs and struggles. They shaped each other, evolved together, pushed each other to redefine limits, and that history can't be rewritten just because the present has changed. Inside the corridors of Brackley, the name Hamilton isn't whispered with regret or bitterness, it's spoken with reverence. His championships, his impossible pole laps, his comebacks from the depths of the grid, his title battles under pressure, all of it is part of the team's collective DNA. It isn't confined to framed photographs or trophy cabinets. It exists in the way new engineers are taught to think under pressure, in the expectations drivers must meet, in the very culture of resilience and excellence that he helped shape. The walls carry his echoes. The people still carry his imprint. That's not a marketing pitch. That's not nostalgia crafted for fans. That's a lived reality. And when Toto Wolff stood in front of the world and said, "It's not fair," it wasn't a complaint, it was a statement of deeper value. That short, restrained remark didn't reference race pace, tire wear, or telemetry. It was about more than lap charts. It was a commentary on the intangible parts of Formula One that data can't quantify: respect, memory, honor, loyalty. Toto wasn't defending a poor performance or lashing out at rivals. He was drawing a line between two philosophies. One that views drivers as partners, as family, as irreplaceable parts of a shared journey. And another that treats them as assets, as variables in a performance equation, as figures to be celebrated only when the results align with expectations. Toto reminded everyone listening that true greatness doesn't vanish when the stopwatch ticks slower. And in that moment, he indirectly questioned Ferrari's silence, Ferrari's posture, Ferrari's emotional distance from the very champion they brought into their fold. It wasn't supposed to be like this. When Hamilton made the earth-shaking decision to join Ferrari, it was seen as a fairy tale in the making, a legendary driver uniting with the most iconic team in the sport's history. The idea alone captured imaginations worldwide. Millions envisioned roaring tifosi at Monza chanting his name, historic wins celebrated in scarlet under Italian skies, the resurrection of a legendary brand carried on the shoulders of one of the greatest ever. And yet, months into the partnership, the atmosphere surrounding Hamilton at Ferrari remains curiously sterile. There are no explosive tributes, no fiery defenses, no grandiose declarations of belief. Instead, there is professionalism. Cold, controlled, and clinical professionalism. Victory is acknowledged, but not embraced. Effort is noted, but not championed. It's as if Ferrari still holds him at arm's length, waiting to see if he becomes one of them, or if he fades away as just another chapter in their long and storied history. This lack of warmth becomes even more stark when viewed in contrast with Charles Leclerc's position within the team. Leclerc isn't just a driver for Ferrari, he's the embodiment of their future, the carefully molded heir to their vision. He's been with them long enough to know their internal language, to mirror their public image, to carry their hopes without ever appearing misaligned. The emotional investment in Leclerc is visible. He can have a rough weekend, a strategic misfire, a missed opportunity, and still, the faith in him remains unwavering. There is an unspoken grace extended to him, a margin for error wrapped in familial protection. He's one of their own. He was raised in the Ferrari system, and every podium, every pole, every heroic drive is met with sincere celebration. Hamilton, by contrast, is the anomaly. He didn't come up through their ranks. He arrived fully formed, fully decorated, already a global icon with a legacy that demanded respect. But that very completeness seems to complicate his integration. Ferrari didn't build him, they bought him. And in doing so, they may not have realized that greatness doesn't always mold easily into new systems. The rhythms of his past team don't match the patterns of his new one. Communication styles differ. Trust must be rebuilt from scratch. The process is longer, more delicate, more prone to misunderstanding. And yet, the patience shown to others in the past seems absent here. Every race where he finishes behind Leclerc adds fuel to the narrative that perhaps Ferrari made the wrong choice. The media doesn't hesitate to ask if Hamilton's best years are behind him. The headlines are merciless. Has Hamilton lost his magic? Is Ferrari already regretting the move? Will he ever win again in red? Those questions aren't born from analysis. They are designed to provoke, to pressure, to create division. And within Ferrari, they create a quiet instability. The kind that forces people to speak more cautiously in meetings. The kind that makes engineers second-guess bold decisions. The kind that isolates rather than unites. Behind the scenes, it bleeds into everything. Strategy discussions become more rigid. Race day decisions are filtered through politics and public perception. Every on-track mistake becomes a case study. Every team radio exchange becomes a potential controversy. The weight on Hamilton's shoulders grows heavier, not because of performance, but because of how every action is interpreted through a lens of scrutiny. And yet, despite the increasing tension, despite the whisper campaigns and the constant questioning, Hamilton remains composed. He continues to learn the language of Ferrari, not just the Italian spoken in the paddock, but the coded tones of how they manage pressure, how they react to failure, how they define loyalty. Still, the disparity is unavoidable. Mercedes would never let him walk through the storm alone. They would close ranks. They would shield him, stand with him, lift him. That's what they always did. Even in defeat, he was never abandoned. And that's what makes the contrast so painful to observe. If Mercedes can continue to speak his name with admiration, to remind the world of what they accomplished together, to treat him not as a former employee but as a forever legend, why can't Ferrari offer the same? Why must his transition be so clinical, so transactional, so hollow of genuine emotion? This isn't about winning or losing anymore. This isn't even about points or podiums or championship hopes. This is about something far deeper, about how a team chooses to carry the weight of a champion. About whether they see him as a man or a marketing tool. About whether the most successful driver in the sport's history is being given the grace and respect he has earned. Because greatness isn't just what you do, it's how you're remembered. And right now, Mercedes remembers Lewis Hamilton as the cornerstone of their dynasty. Ferrari, for all its prestige and power, hasn't yet decided whether he's part of theirs. Ferrari is not merely evaluating Lewis Hamilton based on his performance metrics. They are placing him under a relentless spotlight that scrutinizes every move, every instinct, every reaction he displays in and out of the car. This is not a situation in which a driver, especially one with 7 world championships to his name, is being allowed to settle into a new team environment with a healthy grace period to adapt, evolve, and recalibrate. Instead, it is a continuous series of unspoken trials where every corner taken, every setup choice, every post-race comment is treated like another opportunity to question his relevance and value. There is no room for nuance, no acceptance of transitional dynamics, no empathy for what it means to step into a completely new ecosystem after more than a decade in a radically different one. Hamilton's move to Ferrari was never going to be purely about lap times and championship standings. It was always destined to be a cultural shift, an emotional shift, a philosophical gamble that would test not just his speed, but his capacity to rebuild trust, rewire his instincts, and recalibrate his rhythm inside an entirely new machine, both mechanical and organizational. The challenge is not just technical but deeply psychological. At Mercedes, Hamilton wasn't just a driver, he was part of the very architecture of the team's success. His feedback shaped the cars, his input influenced strategy, his leadership helped foster a sense of unity across departments. He was a co-creator of the culture. At Ferrari, he is being treated as an outsider attempting to earn his way into a circle he already surpassed years ago in terms of achievement. The reverence one would expect for a driver of his caliber is replaced by a sort of cold clinical detachment, as though the past can be set aside and only the present will be tolerated. Toto Wolff didn't need a crystal ball to see this coming. He didn't make vague, casual remarks when asked about Hamilton's move. He issued a quiet, carefully measured warning. A warning rooted in lived experience, in years of observing what happens to even the most talented drivers when the support system around them erodes. Psychological safety, that invisible yet indispensable element of high performance, is often misunderstood. It is not about comfort or leniency. It is about creating an environment where individuals feel secure enough to push their limits without fear of disproportionate retribution. When that safety is gone, performance doesn't just plateau, it deteriorates. The joy of racing gets replaced by second-guessing. The clarity of instinct turns into hesitation. The confidence that once allowed for magic becomes muffled by doubt. Wolff understood this, which is why he spent years ensuring that Mercedes became a fortress of trust, not just engineering excellence. He knew that to unlock the full potential of a driver like Hamilton, you had to make room for more than just raw pace. You had to allow space for emotional expression, for vulnerability, for error, and then respond to those moments not with condemnation, but with belief. That belief became the foundation upon which Mercedes built not just race-winning cars, but a dynasty of sustained dominance. One doesn't have to look further than Mercedes' current treatment of young Kimi Antonelli to see how this philosophy still endures. Antonelli, despite the considerable pressure of being touted as the next generational talent, is being allowed to grow, to falter, to learn. His errors are acknowledged without being weaponized. His promise is discussed more than his shortcomings. The engineering team, the media division, and even senior leadership at Mercedes speak about Antonelli's trajectory with patience and optimism, not urgency or frustration. He is not being asked to justify his place every Sunday. He is being given the tools, time, and environment to justify it over a career. This is what building a champion actually looks like. It's not instant. It's not clinical. It's not devoid of humanity. Now compare that with the environment Ferrari has created around Hamilton. There is no sense of mutual investment in his success, only performance metrics and public statements that read like veiled ultimatums. Mistakes are magnified. Adaptation is mistaken for weakness. Every post-race interview feels like a press conference after a failed experiment, not a reflection on a long-term plan. There's an eerie lack of acknowledgement that Hamilton, for all his accolades, is still a human being undergoing a massive transition. The absence of that understanding is not just a managerial oversight, it is a systemic issue that speaks to a deeper cultural divide within the team. Ferrari has a long history of producing legends, but also of devouring them. Drivers like Alain Prost, Sebastian Vettel, and Fernando Alonso have all at one point walked through the Maranello gates full of hope, only to be gradually worn down by the political machinations, the emotional distance, and the institutional rigidity that can fester within the walls of a legacy brand so fixated on preserving its past that it sometimes forgets how to nurture its present. And now Hamilton finds himself walking that same tightrope, haunted by a history he wasn't part of and shackled by expectations that ignore the very real human process of integration and emotional alignment. What Toto Wolff is witnessing now isn't merely the performance struggles of a former driver. It's the slow dismantling of a philosophy he spent years building. He sees the difference not in results, but in the demeanor, the body language, the tone of voice in interviews, the subtle, almost imperceptible withdrawal of the kind of confidence Hamilton used to radiate during his time at Mercedes. Toto isn't just watching another driver fall short. He's watching a legacy be dissected rather than respected, measured with a ruler rather than understood through a lens of empathy and long-term vision. Wolff has always understood that a Formula One team is more than a collection of engineers and parts. It's a living organism of culture, belief, and identity. The best teams are not just fast, they are aligned. They are safe. They are resilient in the face of failure, not reactive. At Mercedes, even during seasons of decline, the internal structure never turned on its drivers. Mistakes were absorbed, not amplified. Struggles were addressed, not exposed. That was not a weakness, it was a strength that allowed people to take risks, speak up, and ultimately grow. And that was the environment in which Hamilton became not just a champion, but a generational symbol of excellence. What's happening at Ferrari right now, by contrast, is a portrait of what happens when a team lacks that depth of belief. They may have speed, they may have resources, they may even have iconic status, but without trust, without continuity, without the ability to embrace the full scope of a driver's humanity, they will always fall short of what they could become. And in the process, they risk not only wasting talent, but actively diminishing it. Hamilton was never going to be a quick fix for Ferrari. He was a long-term bet, not just for results, but for culture. And instead of rallying around that, the team has chosen to assess him in fragments. To treat him as a case study rather than a collaborator. It's a tragic misreading of what makes champions endure, not just speed, but security. Not just numbers, but narrative. Not just skill, but the belief that someone, somewhere inside the garage, truly has their back even when the results don't. Toto Wolff understands that belief is invisible until it's tested. And what he's seeing now is a team that never truly believed in Hamilton to begin with, only in what he might deliver. That kind of conditional trust is not the foundation of greatness. It's the beginning of the end. This moment, as it unfolded, wasn't random, wasn't born out of a burst of emotion, nor was it some routine media comment aimed at stirring the pot for entertainment. It was the product of foresight, deliberate timing, and a profound understanding of the psychological layers that exist within the hyper-competitive world of Formula One. Toto Wolff doesn't speak without intention. Every syllable is calculated. Every phrase is tailored to hit specific pressure points. What might have seemed like a simple public endorsement of Lewis Hamilton was, in reality, a well-executed strategic maneuver designed to disrupt, destabilize, and reshape the internal conversations occurring behind closed doors at Ferrari. Wolff didn't just issue words of encouragement, he set a trap constructed out of public expectation and media scrutiny. He knew exactly how the Formula One media machine would respond, how journalists would leap on the story, how broadcasters would amplify the narrative, and how fans across the world would begin to question Ferrari's internal unity. It wasn't merely a show of support for a former rival, it was a masterclass in manipulation of perception, an art Wolff has mastered over years of guiding Mercedes through championship glory and psychological warfare. He anticipated the inevitable domino effect. He understood that his comments would shift the spotlight away from Mercedes, a team entering a rebuilding phase, and squarely onto Ferrari, a team already under intense pressure to deliver immediate success with Hamilton's arrival. More importantly, he forced Ferrari into a reactive posture. No matter what Ferrari says now, or chooses not to say, they've been backed into a corner. If they come out in support of Hamilton, it will appear defensive, almost as if Wolff's comments pushed them into it. If they remain quiet, it invites a storm of speculation. Are they truly backing Hamilton? Is there tension already forming behind the scenes? Why haven't they responded with conviction? In one move, Wolff subtly shifted the narrative burden from the shoulders of Lewis Hamilton, who up until now has carried the weight of expectations, transition pressures, and the challenge of adapting to a new car and culture, and placed it directly onto Ferrari's leadership. Wolff weaponized the media's insatiable appetite for conflict and speculation, creating a scenario in which Ferrari's silence would be interpreted as weakness, and their words would be dissected for signs of internal fractures. This is how perception becomes more influential than performance in Formula One. What fans, analysts, and insiders believe about a team can have just as much impact as what actually happens on track. And Toto Wolff has been operating in this space long enough to know how to control the narrative before a single lap is even completed. He has seen what happens when drivers full of talent and ambition are absorbed by Ferrari's allure, only to find themselves gradually worn down by an institution that, while rich in history, has often struggled to embrace evolution. Wolff has studied this pattern in meticulous detail. He remembers Fernando Alonso's time in red. The Spaniard arrived as a two-time world champion, hungry for his third title and determined to bring glory back to Maranello. The relationship started with fireworks, but Ferrari's inability to deliver a consistently competitive car, combined with political undercurrents and internal power struggles, slowly drained Alonso's energy and enthusiasm. His brilliance was never in question, but the environment around him eroded his ability to thrive. Then came Sebastian Vettel. His entrance into Ferrari echoed that of a romantic tale, childhood dreams realized, tears in his eyes as he donned the red suit for the first time. But even Vettel, a four-time world champion, found himself isolated when performances dipped. The same organization that had welcomed him with open arms began to retreat when he needed them most. Instead of reinforcing their support, they pulled back, and that erosion of trust ultimately led to his exit. Michael Schumacher's story is often used as a counterpoint, but what's frequently forgotten is that Schumacher was afforded the luxury of time. Years to build, to restructure, to bring in key personnel, to mold Ferrari around his vision. That kind of patience no longer exists. Today's Ferrari is governed by immediacy, driven by the pressure of sponsors, executives, and millions of loyal tifosi desperate for a return to dominance. There's no longer room for slow-burning projects. Expectations are no longer aspirational, they are demands, and they are immediate. And that brings us to the present, to Hamilton's new chapter. He was received with overwhelming fanfare, welcomed as the savior, the final piece in a puzzle that has long eluded completion. But as history has shown, the real test doesn't lie in the unveiling or the press conferences or the early photo shoots in the red overalls. The true challenge emerges when reality sets in, when the grind of development begins, when the car isn't delivering, when results stall. Will Ferrari continue to stand by him if he struggles in the opening races? Will they give him the trust and autonomy to guide development? Or will they slowly begin to distance themselves, offering polite words while quietly shifting their focus elsewhere? This is what Wolff is provoking. He's asking a deeper question, not to the fans, not even to Hamilton, but to Ferrari's leadership itself. Do you truly understand what it takes to support greatness, even when it's inconvenient? The emotional volatility within Ferrari's structure has often mirrored its on-track inconsistency. The team is prone to dramatic swings, exuberant when things go well, fatalistic when they don't. This oscillation in energy creates an unstable foundation for any driver, especially one used to the consistency and long-term strategy of Mercedes. Hamilton has operated in a system built on trust, data, continuity, and mutual respect. Transitioning into an organization with a culture more reactive than proactive is not just a technical adjustment, it's a psychological one. If Ferrari expects him to deliver the kind of success Schumacher once did, they must provide the same level of unwavering belief, especially during the difficult stretches. And as the season progresses, every interaction between Hamilton and the team will be scrutinized. Every radio message will be replayed, every pit wall reaction dissected. A simple delay in pitting him, a slightly critical post-race comment, or a lack of visible support on social media will fuel speculation. These are the conditions Wolff has deliberately accelerated. He's ensured that Ferrari is being watched not just for performance, but for unity. He's framed the narrative so that every misstep is interpreted not as a racing error, but as a sign of deeper dysfunction. And Hamilton, for his part, is no stranger to this landscape. He knows how quickly support can turn into scrutiny. He's experienced the politics of Formula One from every angle. He understands that sometimes, the loudest messages are sent in silence. And he's watching. He's watching how the team reacts after each setback, how they frame their messaging, how they treat the moments when he isn't standing on the top step of the podium. He's listening closely, not just to what is said in the garage, but to the tone, to the intent, to the energy behind every interaction. Because that's where trust is built, or broken. If Ferrari falters in providing that psychological safety net, Hamilton will know. He will feel it long before anyone else notices it. And once that trust begins to erode, it becomes nearly impossible to rebuild. So as we move through the races ahead, it's not just about lap times or tire strategies or upgrades. It's about whether Ferrari can evolve, whether they can offer Hamilton not just a competitive car, but a culture of sustained belief. Because without that, no amount of raw talent or engineering brilliance can compensate. And Toto Wolff, with a few carefully chosen words, has ensured that the world will be watching this dynamic unfold in real time. Ferrari is under the microscope now, not because of their results, but because of how they treat their champion when the spotlight fades and the struggle begins. If Ferrari insists on continuing to treat Lewis Hamilton as a high-profile guest, rather than as the strategic centerpiece of their long-term vision, they are not only misreading the gravity of the moment, they are actively jeopardizing the very foundation upon which a championship-winning partnership must be built. Hamilton is not just another driver transitioning into a new team. He is the most statistically accomplished Formula One driver in history, a 7-time world champion whose presence alone alters the psychological landscape of the grid. His signing was not meant to be ceremonial, nor was it simply a marketing coup. It was intended to be the spark that reignites Ferrari's championship ambitions and repositions the Scuderia as the central force in the sport. However, if Hamilton continues to perceive even the faintest trace of doubt, hesitation, or lack of full internal commitment from Ferrari's top management, engineering staff, or race strategists, the psychological bridge between the two entities will begin to erode. And once the process begins, it is nearly impossible to reverse. Formula One is not just about building the fastest car or employing the most talented driver. It is a symphony of alignment, mechanical, emotional, and strategic. When a driver of Hamilton's stature senses a lack of trust from his team, when he detects that critical decisions are made without his insight, or when feedback loops are short-circuited by internal politics, the symbiosis collapses. This is not speculation. This is proven time and again, across decades of Formula One history. No matter how fast the car may be, no matter how many updates are brought to the floor, a team cannot win championships if the internal chemistry is broken. And for Ferrari, a team that has carried the burden of expectation since its inception, failing to fully integrate Hamilton into the core of their identity would not just be a tactical error, it would be a seismic miscalculation with consequences that could echo far beyond this season. Hamilton's presence was supposed to mark a turning point, a line in the sand that distinguished Ferrari's past of inconsistency from a new era of structure, belief, and elite execution. But belief cannot be performative. It must be demonstrated in action, through strategic clarity, engineering transparency, and most importantly, unwavering commitment to the driver's input and leadership. If that commitment is anything less than absolute, Hamilton will feel it. And once he senses that Ferrari's promises were more rhetoric than reality, he will begin to disengage, not dramatically, but in incremental and irreversible ways. His debriefs may become less passionate, his feedback less detailed, his motivation subtly dimmed, not due to disinterest, but due to mistrust. And when mistrust infiltrates a driver's mindset, especially one as accomplished and analytical as Hamilton, performance inevitably suffers, not because he becomes slower, but because the ecosystem around him begins to malfunction. The summer stretch of the 2025 season is not just a checkpoint in the calendar. It is Ferrari's crucible. These races will reveal whether Ferrari can finally transcend their pattern of self-sabotage. It is their opportunity to show they are not only serious about winning, but serious about winning with Hamilton, not in spite of him. For decades, Ferrari has flirted with greatness only to fall short due to internal fragmentation, conflicting priorities, and a chronic inability to trust fully in the people they bring on board. From Prost to Alonso to Vettel, Ferrari's history is littered with relationships that began with promise and ended in disappointment, not because those drivers lacked ability, but because Ferrari couldn't fully commit to a unified vision. If they allow the same story to unfold with Hamilton, the cost will be incalculable. Because Hamilton isn't just any driver. He is still performing at an elite level, with the hunger of a rookie and the wisdom of a veteran. He brings not only speed but leadership, technical insight, and a wealth of championship experience that no one else on the grid can replicate. Letting him slip away, emotionally or literally, would be more than just losing a driver. It would be forfeiting the very asset that could elevate Ferrari from a team of potential to a team of legacy. The margin for error is non-existent. This is not just about avoiding conflict. It's about forging a structure in which Hamilton becomes the gravitational center of the team. Everything, from strategy meetings to aerodynamic priorities to long-term development pathways, must revolve around empowering him. Anything less, and Ferrari risks turning one of the most transformative signings in modern F1 history into yet another chapter of unrealized promise. And this is where the real sting comes in. The rest of the paddock knows this. Rivals are watching. Mercedes is watching. Red Bull is watching. Even the newer stakeholders, Audi, Aston Martin and Andretti, are paying attention to how Ferrari handles this rare opportunity. Which is why Toto Wolff's recent comments about Ferrari's treatment of Hamilton were anything but spontaneous. They were crafted with surgical precision, deployed not in defense of Hamilton's legacy, because that legacy needs no defense, but as a calculated pressure point on Ferrari's leadership. Wolff knows that words, in the right context, can be more devastating than data. His statement was not a casual observation. It was a masterclass in psychological manipulation. He wasn't speaking to journalists or casual fans. He was speaking directly to the executives in Maranello, to the political power brokers within Ferrari structure, and to the passionate tifosi who are beginning to wonder whether their beloved team truly knows how to win in the modern era. Wolff's message was a mirror, held up not to judge, but to expose. What Ferrari saw in that reflection was not strength. It was fragility, indecision, and the creeping fear that they may once again squander greatness through their own inability to evolve. And now, that reflection haunts them in every paddock appearance, every press conference, every strategy meeting. The silence around the issue speaks louder than words. The tension is palpable, not just inside the team, but across the global fanbase who are beginning to ask the same question. Is Ferrari truly ready to change, or are they simply repeating history with a new face and a different name? This is no longer a question of whether Hamilton will adapt to Ferrari. He already has. It's now a question of whether Ferrari is willing to adapt to Hamilton. If they're not, if they continue to hold onto archaic notions of hierarchy, or if they insist on clinging to the institutional conservatism that has defined them for years, then they will lose him. Not necessarily to another team, though that remains a distinct possibility, but in spirit. And a disillusioned Hamilton is not the ally Ferrari can afford. Because once he checks out, the rest of the garage will follow. Morale will dip. Internal confidence will fracture. The belief in the project will fade, and with it, any shot at championship glory. Ferrari cannot afford to treat this season like just another campaign. This is a defining moment, not only for their future, but for their reputation. They must prove that they are not only capable of attracting greatness, but also of nurturing it. That they understand what it takes to compete at the absolute peak of modern Formula One. Not just in terms of machinery, but in terms of leadership, trust, and human dynamics. Hamilton is watching. So is the entire sport. And time is not on Ferrari's side. The longer they hesitate, the deeper the damage becomes. So if you believe Hamilton deserves more than a title shot, if you believe he deserves full commitment, full transparency, and full belief from the team that signed him with such fanfare, then make your voice heard. Comment below, I stand with Lewis. This is not about fandom or sentiment. This is about the soul of Formula One, and the kind of legacy that will define the next decade of racing. This story isn't winding down. It's accelerating. The pressure is rising, the stakes are mounting, and the eyes of the world are focused on Maranello. What happens next will either mark the beginning of a new golden era, or the repetition of a painful, all too familiar fall. The storm hasn't passed. It's only gaining force.